What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Knull, where he gets new abilities. Now, coming off the video that we last did, a lot of you guys asked about the illuminated Eddie Brock. We'll talk about him, but the way that this kicks off is it has Eddie talking directly to Knull, because they are currently in the LIGHTFORCE dimension. I'll explain that here in a second, but Eddie Brock says, "You have sacrificed a lot on the long road here, Knull. First, your freedom, then your power. Hell, even the idea of who and what you are. Because what's the god of darkness in a place that has no darkness at all? Maybe in a way, you're even sacrificing your life right now too. But that's just how it goes. Trust me, it's one thing to reach the Lumina doorway, but you have to suffer a little ego death before the light will actually invite you through. Of course, it doesn't hurt if you've got a friend working the door. I am that friend, Knull. My name is Eddie Brock, or at least it was. I mostly go by the Illuminated these days, and I am a big-time believer in second chances. Now, at this point, Eddie goes into an explanation of what happened with him becoming the Illuminated, but we'll reference the actual one-shot comic of Venom Original Sin. What I didn't realize is Marvel had taken all the Infinity comics and thrown it into a single comic book and released it out there. So because we have it, it makes things easier. But let's talk about the LIGHTFORCE dimension for a second, because in a lot of ways this can be ambiguous, and it should be. It's the home of the Enigma Force. Now, the reason why the Enigma Force matters is because those of you guys who remember the original King in Black story, Eddie Brock in the main Marvel universe gained the Enigma Force, which was basically pure light, pure energy, and then he used it to defeat Knull, which kind of set Knull on the path that he is now, with a lot of stuff going on in between. But the other thing about it, and Eddie's going to make a reference to this place, the LIGHTFORCE dimension, which is effectively created or was created by the Celestials, is actually a doorway to the House of Ideas, basically to the realm of the one above all. So Knull is like right there. Knull's like right there at the entry point to the one above all, which is kind of bonkers when you think about it. But kind of going into Eddie's explanation of how it was that he became the Illuminated, we're going to switch over to the Original Sin comic. And the way that this kicked off is it initially started with Eddie Brock making a deal with Jack-o'-lantern. Now, here's the thing about this. This guy is your kind of fill-in-the-blank mercenary, right? Like, people pay him to do stuff, he does it, he gets paid. If you don't pay him, he'll kill you, and then that'll be it. You will be one of many instances where people learn not to rip Jack-o'-lantern off. Now, the way this worked, and keep in mind, this is an alternate reality version of Eddie Brock, he had struck a deal with Jack-o'-lantern. The idea being that essentially Jack-o'-lantern would tell him when he was going to engage in any kind of a scheme or something like that, and Eddie would get there early enough in order to get the scoop. And in fact, Eddie tells him, right, if you do this for me, I will give you a cut of the money that I make, right? That's all you have to do. Just let me know when you're going to do some scheme and you'll get a cut of it. And so what ends up happening is that a few weeks after that, Eddie's told by Jack-o'-lantern, here's where I'm going to be, here's the time that I'm going to be there at that time. And of course, Eddie Brock's running a little bit late. When he gets there, Jack-o'-lantern ends up facing off against Spider-Man. Basically, this is Spider-Man at the time when he had the Venom symbiote after Secret Wars in 1984. Now, the crazy thing about this is the fight is no holds barred between these two guys. But what ends up going on is that while Eddie is here watching this fight go down, there's a couple of cops who are stuck in the warehouse trying to get out, and they can't because the door's chained up because the place is basically closed. And so Eddie Brock just kind of talks about how it's just the wind, right? He pretends they're not there and ultimately lets them die. And so while Eddie's sitting there in the alley watching the fight unfold, Spider-Man gets the upper hand on Jack-o'-lantern. He doesn't kill him, but he knocks him out. And that's when you find out it's Peter Parker, but it's not Peter Parker because he addresses Eddie directly. And the fact that he knows Eddie's name catches him by surprise. And Eddie asks, right, like, how in the world do you know who I am? And his response, this is a freak show. As for us knowing each other, that's true. And it's not true. We are each other. Take a closer look. I am you. We are Eddie Brock. And so he says, I am you, Eddie, a reflection of you from a future place and time. And I know every wrong turn that's coming your way. I have lived your mistakes so that you don't have to, but only if you listen. And so that's when Eddie asked the question, where do we start? And so this is really cool, because if you're familiar with the history of Eddie Brock, this seems to kind of throw you off, right? You're like, I mean, I thought Eddie Brock's origin story was effectively the same across every universe, or at least the main components of it were intact. Is this rewriting it all? No, it's not. And in fact, it ties in to the traditional origin of Eddie if you're familiar with it in Marvel Comics. Because what ends up happening is that as the two of them start talking, future Eddie tells this present version of Eddie, a few months from now, the killing is going to start. It's going to be a guy called the Sin Eater. He starts blowing away anybody he decides is corrupt, and he acts like he's righteous. I thought I had him figured out. I thought he was Emil Gregg, some total loss. But listen, I was wrong. The story ruined my life. It brought me and the suit together. You can run the right story. You can name and stop the Sin Eater and take the glory. It's not Gregg. It's Gregg's neighbor, Stanley Carter. Now, that's true, and that's the original origin of Eddie in Marvel Comics. The way this played out was that Eddie had initially thought he had broken the story, and when he had published it, it was sensational news because the Sin Eater was going after politicians and the whole 9 yards. But when the truth came out and Spider-Man was the one who had figured out that it was Stan, it made Eddie Brock look like a laughingstock, and that's what set him on the path of harboring an extreme vendetta for Spider-Man, and then ultimately gaining the Venom symbiote when Spider-Man cast it off, and then becoming Venom as we knew him from the old school stories of his character. Again, all that happens in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 300, but that's when future Eddie tells present Eddie it was supposed to be my big break. Now, it will be yours. And so it's basically a chance for Eddie to right all the wrongs. Here's the irony behind it. Jack-o'-lantern comes to and then attacks future Eddie, thinking that it's actually Spider-Man. And what's crazy is that Jack-o'-lantern, because he uses fire and because the weakness of symbiotes is fire, he kills future Eddie Brock. And what this does is because future Eddie is dead, but is in the body of Peter Parker, it also kills Spider-Man. So now we're in a world where there is no Spider-Man and there is no Venom symbiote. It's simply just Eddie Brock. And so when Eddie turns around and like bashes the head in of Jack-o'-lantern and effectively kills him, that's when he looks around and it's just like, oh my God, right? He killed the other me. And then he's like, no, wait a minute. He killed Spider-Man. And that's one hell of a story. And that is when his entire life changes. Because just like the main Marvel Universe, in the early days of Eddie Brock's life, he works at the Daily Globe and he publishes the story. Now, as you can imagine, the death of Spider-Man is a huge story. It was huge when he died in the Ultimate Universe in the 2000s. So it stands to reason that within any one particular universe, the death of Spider-Man is going to be a major scoop for whoever covers it. And that's exactly what happens with Eddie Brock. His life explodes, right? It blows up. It becomes everything he was hoping it was. And that's exactly what we're told. Eddie got to climbing. His future self might have died in Spider-Man's body, but his wisdom lives on. Eddie blew the Sin Eater story wide open. Stan Carter went to jail and Eddie got a corner office. He was the writer at the Daily Globe, and the Globe was the paper in the city. Circulation on the Daily Bugle died. Spider-Man was their kitchen table issue, and without him, they couldn't really sell anything. But what it also talks about is because there is no Spider-Man, there was no one to stop the villains. Now, we also kind of have to assume there are no Avengers in this particular reality. Otherwise, they certainly would have showed up here, and they would have dealt with any number of these threats, given the severity of it all. Because what we're told is that Eddie Brock might have been flying high, but with no Spider-Man, the Rhino had no problem lifting a diplomat from a moving train. Of course, if the Avengers were here, this is certainly something they would have got involved in, right? The Scorpion tore his way out of a prison transport and the whole city paid. Of course, Eddie got the byline. Some of the other local talent tried to fill Spider-Man's shoes. People didn't really get how much Spider-Man had done until he was gone. Dr. Octopus funded years of research with a single summer heist series, but it wasn't the thieves who really won out or the small-time crooks. It was the sickos, unhinged freaks like the Green Goblin. Spider-Man was his to kill, or so he thought. Without that, he went even madder and took it out on his competitors. That was a huge story, and it got Eddie Brock the Pulitzer Prize. But then we transition over to the LIGHTFORCE Dimension, where it says, and then, there in that bed, Eddie believed every word, because in that moment with Anne Wang staying in his life, because he hasn't gone crazy after losing everything, lost his reputation over what was effectively a made-up story, and she ran off, because she's still there, the two of them are very much in love. And when he says things like things on the streets are getting wilder every day, she says, so are we. So very much like, ignore the world out there, it's only the two of us, let's focus on us. He says, you're right, and you always are. Without the crazy, I would be out of business, and business is good. You and me, we're living the dream. When this voice says, Eddie believed every word, it says, but a different Eddie knew better. There are a lot of us out there after all. Plenty of Eddies, but not many get to see this place. Most Eddies end up at the Garden of Time, but this is somewhere brighter. The Lumina, the light force dimension, the home of the light, or almost at least. There is only one Eddie here, and he is not the world's happiest. Meet the Illuminated, the first Eddie Brock to stick with the light, to abdicate the kingdom in black, and basically to keep the Enigma Force. And so what's crazy is that Eddie as the Illuminated in this place is met by the eventuality. Now, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with it, we get the explanation here, so we don't have to run through the whole history. Because what ends up happening is Eddie starts talking with the eventuality, and he says, I took my shot. I went back and tried to fix things and ruined it. Now you're saying that all of this is still salvageable. How? And that's when we start to find out what's really going on here and what he's talking about when he says trying to go back. Because the eventuality tells him, because you're you, and I don't mean Eddie Brock, we get a lot of those, and somehow, some way, they all end up as me, the eventuality, every version of Eddie Brock from across the multiverse. You've got something different though. You are not just illuminated, you're enlightened. Every Eddie who becomes the King in Black, they all become me, the eventuality, or so I thought. I felt your absence first, like the dull pain of a shot to the junk. When you can look back at everything from the end of time, what's missing stands out. You were like the rest of us. The light resurrected you to face Knull, and you killed him with the Enigma Force. But unlike us, you abdicated Knull's throne. You chose not to become the King in Black, and you chose to channel the Enigma Force as a bright paladin. You battled the dark wherever and whenever it rose up. When Knull's dying essence revitalized the Chaos King, you killed the Chaos King. Your light remade the symbiote hive into a place to heal and to think. When the symbiote revenge squad attacked you, you protected the hive. You hit the stars, riding the light and shining it on new parts of the galaxy, places no one had ever found before. And eventually, you reached the Lumina, the Garden of Time's counterpart. Here, you found your shot at redemption. And that's when you find out that at the very beginning of the story, when future Eddie had shown up to meet present day Eddie, it was this one. It was the Illuminated, right? That's what he says, redemption. If I go back and erase my original sin, the security guards, all those years ago, just two guys doing their jobs, and I let them die. And that's where the eventuality says, not if you pilot a symbiote in the past and save the guards. And that's when you find out that's what he was supposed to do. It's almost kind of like a time loop, right? That's what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to go back in time, and he was supposed to keep the guards alive. He wasn't supposed to let them die. It would mean that Eddie Brock in the present would not go on to become this landmark writer for the Daily Globe and busting all the stories and all that kind of stuff. It means Peter Parker would live, and Eddie's life would basically unfold the way that it always does in seemingly every single universe. But the hitch, right, the thing that changed it up is Eddie says, going back and waking up as Peter Parker was hard enough. When I got to the warehouse, when I saw that old Eddie and Jack-o'-lantern, I put myself first. I told the old version of me how to unscrew all the things he was going to screw up. I didn't save the guards. I saved myself, and I set Eddie up for success, and he did exactly that. Spider-Man died. There was no one to replace him, but Eddie Brock went on and got married. But guys like Hobgoblin, guys like Cletus Cassidy, they ran amok because there was no one there to stop them. Spider-Man was gone, and so that's when he realizes he has to go back in time again and essentially save the life of the guards. And that's it. That's the only thing he can do, because Eddie has to go on to become the guy that ends up basically ruining his life with a story that turns out to be false. But the problem is that every time he goes back, there's something that prevents him from basically setting things right. In this particular instance, it's him having a conversation with Anne. He's not ready to leave her behind. When he went back and he changed the past, those new memories started filling up his mind. So as the Illuminated, he remembers an entire life with Anne weighing. It's hard to let that go, especially knowing what his life will be like if he goes back and sets things back to rights. But the reality here is, it's what he has to do. It's his original sin. It's what keeps him from being able to enter into heaven, right? Into what's basically the mystery, right? The house of ideas. But ultimately, he does. Right? He does exactly what he's supposed to do. When he gets back to the warehouse, the guards are in there, he rescues the guards, and actually almost sacrifices himself in the process. Now, of course, the guards end up pulling him out of the fire, and they basically save Eddie Brock's life, and despite the fact that he's so severely injured, he still goes in and faces off against Jack-o'-lantern, doing exactly what a superhero is supposed to do. Because when present-day Eddie arrives on the scene, much like at the very beginning of the story, he's watching the whole conflict unfold, except this time, it's unfolding differently. And when Eddie Brock saves the lives of the guards, Jack-o'-lantern taunts him, right? He says, those guards were dead the minute they saw me, Spider-Man. Snatching them from the fire did not save them. It just changed their cause of death. The Magia says no witnesses, and I say the customer's always right. And that's when Eddie tells him, that's a cute little cattle prod, Jack, but for your sake, I hope you brought a bigger one. Like the guards get to live, behave, and you don't have to die. And that's when Jack attacks him anyway. And in that moment, Eddie almost kills him, right? Eddie almost kills Jack-o'-lantern, but instead, he doesn't, right? He holds back and he allows Jack-o'-lantern to live. And so when that happens, Jack-o'-lantern ends up just taking off, right? He bails out. And that's when Eddie gets pissed off, right? Like present day Eddie is just like, dude, we had a deal, right? Like what was going on with that? You were supposed to be able to give me a scoop. Like you're supposed to give me information that I can use to write stories. But Jack's just like, the deal's off, man. This is way more trouble than it's worth. And he bails out. And so of course, what ends up happening is that because the guards are saved, because Spider-Man's not dead, Peter Parker is very much alive, just like the first time at the beginning of the story, when Peter Parker died, future Eddie Brock wakes up in the realm of the Illuminated, knowing that he had fixed his original sin. Now, the way that original sin ended is that Eddie Brock, as the Illuminated, basically disappears, right? He kind of enters through the doorway and goes into the mystery. We didn't really find out what happened after that, but in this real summary that Eddie Brock provides within the context of Knull, which we essentially skipped so we could cover the actual story, that what ends up going on here is that Eddie Brock basically tells Knull, the guards lived, right? The bad guy lost, and my worst enemy got all the credit, while I forfeited everything, but I did get through the doorway. And when I saw your quest to be rid of the dark and embrace the light, I knew I had to lend a hand. Long story short, you don't have to be the Void God, Knull, or anything that anyone else says you are, even the cosmos itself. So seemingly, Eddie Brock came back after entering through the doorway after seeing what was going to happen with Knull. And so it's a chance for Knull to turn over a new leaf. It's a chance for Knull to embrace a new role for himself and become the god of light and essentially become a good guy, which he doesn't do. He immediately clocks Eddie Brock and is like, will you shut up? It's absolutely amazing the way this goes down. And Eddie Brock's flabbergasted by this. He was like, dude, I can't, right? I cannot believe that you are that damn stupid. And so initially it turns into a fight because Knull had literally impaled Eddie Brock with the all-light spear. And Eddie's like a weapon of pure light against a being of pure light. What the hell did you think was going to happen? I really put myself out there for you, right? I thought that this was a redemption thing, your redemption thing. I was going to take you through the doorway straight into the mystery, but no, you just had to go and screw that right up. So now I'm going to screw you up. And he goes on the attack against Knull and cold cocks this guy. And he says, the stinking gall of you, bringing darkness where it does not belong. And Knull just looks at him and says, you really think that there's no darkness here? Well, I say there is, you pathetic human, inside of you. And just like he did with Thanos, he pulls out the darker side of him and uses it as a weapon against him. But the funny thing is that before that can happen, Eddie Brock throws Knull off and he just says, off? or out. And the response of Eddie is screw you. And so Knull just looks at him and says, look at yourself. Even now, an ascended being, you turn to violence. You could have banished me, but no, you wanted to hurt. So tell me, Eddie Brock, does it hurt? Because he literally manifests the darkness as actual spears and stabs Eddie in the face with it, literally right in the eyes. And so Eddie's just kind of sitting there, just like staggering, kind of wandering around a little bit. And he starts to ask him, do you? And so Knull finishes the statement, do I know what I've done? Why, yes, I know exactly what I've done, Eddie Brock. I've revealed the true Eddie Brock under the facade. And Eddie's like, no. Do you like apples? And Knull's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, how do you like them apples? And like literally uses the spear and gashes out the side of Knull. So Knull's just kind of like laying down there, and Eddie just looks at him and says, do you see it now, Knull? Do you feel it in your broken bones? Darkness has no power here. Everything that makes you you is useless in this place. And that's where Knull just says, not everything. This still belongs to me. And he grabs all light, and in that moment, siphons off all the power from Eddie Brock as the Illuminated. So now, Knull has the Enigma Force, and he says, you were right, Eddie. Darkness will not help me in this fight. I have lost so much. It's become the weapon of my enemy and of Hela. So I renounce the darkness, here and now, in the name of pure power. I knew that your barbaric nature would mistake this cosmic conduit for yet another mere weapon. And so when Eddie goes to talk, the response of Knull, when I'm talking, you're not talking. And he's like, you're pitiful enough as it is. Don't feel too bad. I speak from personal experience when I say that even the brightest of angels can fall. I should leave you here, broken, with my thanks for the lesson and the light, of course. But I sense that you've a bit of power remaining inside of you. Waste not, want not, as the saying goes. And to answer your earlier question, baked. I prefer my apples baked. And in that moment, and siphoning off all the remaining power that Eddie Brock has, the entirety of the Enigma Force at his disposal, he takes off, and the star erupts. Because keep in mind, he entered into the star in order to access the light force dimension, entering pure light to access the light. And so it says, and so the death of one star marks the birth of another. I know you are no longer with me, my children, but fear not. I will return to you. We will be reunited. And like me, you shall be transformed. Let Hela have the shadows. I have become the light with all its power and all its majesty and all of its complexity. The stars belong to me now, the countless suns with their infinite dawns and twilights. Light in all its forms is mine to control, from a single flint spark to the supernova I created to herald my rebirth, from the artificial glow of far distant cities to the electromagnetic crackle and play of radio waves. And then suddenly he's interrupted, right? And it just says, shields holding, right? Target on monitor now. And he's like, what is this? And when he looks over, he sees the ship of Thanos. Now, Knull had faced off against Thanos. He literally thought Thanos was going to be a pushover, and Thanos was anything but. Knull did defeat him, and Knull seemingly killed him. But that's where the ship says, standing by for orders. And Thanos, in looking at Knull, just says, it appears he's had an upgrade. Fine. So have I. Thanos has literally upgraded himself with new abilities. And what I'm really excited to see is what those new powers are. Because I'm going to tell you guys right now, that battle armor looks amazing. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. We have one more issue left, and then the story's done. And I'll be honest with you guys, I don't want it to end. This is phenomenal. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.